Hey everybody, what's up? It's Chad. Time to get a checkup on the market. And there are a couple things that I wanted to talk about today. First thing is first. So here in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the S&P 500, and we can see the action down to start off the first hour of the day, and then we made a big recovery. The current chart that I'm showing is only until about 10:45. And I'll explain why in a sec. But if you look at the chart above that, this is the dollar. So you can see we had this big spike early on until right about 7:15, 7:30, 7:20 or so, and then the dollar started to retreat. So our correlation with the dollar still continues. We had some similar action with crude oil today too. So also some correlation there. So a lot of things going on like we were talking about last time. But what I wanted to talk about today was MACD divergence. I wanted to explain what that is because I use it a lot in my trading, and it's pretty good for you to know. So let's look at the S&P 500 for today. Especially the first hour, we had this trend downward, right? Lower lows right here, lower lows. So if we look at the MACD right below it, we see that it was making higher highs. See that? So right about at, sorry, I'm speaking on Pacific time, 6:45 or so Pacific time, 9:45 East Coast time, we saw a low in the S&P 500, and the MACD also made a low. The stock then retraced, and then came back down and made a lower low at about 10:30 Eastern time before turning around and moving upward. So the MACD made a low at 10:30 also, but the low there was higher than the previous one. So that's a divergence. When the lows in the MACD increase and the lows in the S&P 500 decrease, that's a divergence. And it works the opposite way as well. So you can see for the rest of the day, the S&P 500 had a nice rally. But you can see at each peak, here's one at 8:15 or so, or 11:15 East Coast time. Here's another one at about 12 o'clock East Coast time, and then another one at about 1 o'clock East Coast time, 10 o'clock West Coast time. And if you look down below, the MACD diverges the opposite way. So each one of these peaks are lower than the previous. So that may suggest that each one of these peaks in the S&P 500 is decreasing in strength. So you may see a pullback, and that's exactly what we saw. So if we fast forward a little bit, you see we saw a definite pullback here from the hours of 1 o'clock Eastern until about 2:15. We saw this move, sort of a retracement downward. So the MACD divergence may have been predicting that. Now the problem with that is on the uptrend we saw 3 peaks. On the downtrend we saw 2 peaks. So it's impossible really to say exactly when the turnaround is going to occur. But we can say that it looks like the strength or the weakness is decreasing. So if we look at this next chart over here, we have this is the daily chart. So we can see the same thing. So if we look at the peak in April, right here, we can see some divergence down below in the MACD. So the peaks were decreasing into the end of April, whereas the S&P 500 was increasing into the end of April. So there's a divergence. So we did get a pullback in May and into June. It wasn't severe, but the trend did not continue. And then the interesting thing is this peak on June 8th was higher. Here we go. This peak on June 8th was higher than this peak at the end of April. So the question is, are we seeing a divergence there? And we are. So these peaks were higher. The MACD peaks were lower. So that may have been looking forward to a decrease, which is what we've seen so far for the month of June and the very beginning of July, where we have lower highs. So let's see if we can make any sense of that on a weekly chart. So up here in the top right-hand corner, right up here, we have a weekly chart. Here's our peak in April, and here's our peak in June. Do we see the same divergence? Actually, no, the divergence disappears. On the weekly chart, the MACD down here, is upgoing. So that may indicate that we haven't seen our top yet. But you never know until it actually happens. So we may have actually a head and shoulders here, with a head and two shoulders right here. Our last shoulder may have taken place this past week after the recovery from Brexit, if we end up continuing lower, which it looks like we are, at least for the time being. Now, if we break the trend line of our lower highs for the last month, then that would change everything, right? That would break our shoulder and possibly indicate a move forward. So we'll see. Anyway, just wanted to talk about MACD divergence, so we are all on the same page when we talk about it in the future. All right, everybody, have a great week. Trade strong.